Hello friends, welcome back to another theoretical discussion on non-ferrous metallography and characterization. So in the previous lecture we have looked into several non-ferrous materials. We have seen their alloys or the composition or the alloying elements that are added to a specific non-ferrous material to expand their applicability to enhance their properties. In the context of this lecture we saw that with the change or with the addition of different alloying elements, the property of the materials change, the application of it correspondingly changes. In addition to both properties and application which are interrelated, we saw that the metallographic technique that needs to be adapted, particularly both polishing and also, or rather particularly polishing and etching techniques or the etchants that are required, changes with the alloys or the alloying elements that we use. So in this lecture we will be following similar trend and we will be focusing on lead and its alloys. Now to give an historical perspective, like to take an approach that we have been taking so far, lead is, if you go back to the dates when it was used, lead goes back to the date or the period during which copper was used. If you could recollect, we saw that copper has been with us. We have been, as a human race, we have been using it for a quite long time. To be more specific, we have been using it at the late stage of the Stone Ages. We saw that people used copper in order to enhance or to make their potteries more attractive. And this was around 7000 BC. And if you want to calculate the time from today, it's around 9000 years before. And lead was also used in the similar period. Now lead was also equally used as copper in order to enhance or in order to make their potteries more attractive. Now given that both copper and lead was used on the similar time period, more or less they were used in the similar areas, you might wonder why we have, after the Stone Age, we have copper age but not the lead age. One of the reason is, when you consider what we discussed about copper, we saw that one of the ores for copper, or one of the ways the copper was easily available to the Stone Age people, was native copper. The copper was naturally available to them. The pure form of copper was naturally available to them. However, this was not the case with lead. Lead was always found in the form of a mineral or a ore, and they used, without knowing that this is ore of a lead or this is a mineral of a lead, they used it just because of its property, particularly the luxurious properties, and they used largely in the potteries. Now if you want to be specific, or the evidence that presents us that lead was used at the same time as copper dates back to 6400 BC, and we have in the modern day Turkey, we have some metallic beads that was formed during this period, that is 6400 BC, around the same time when copper was used. And copper was, we also saw that we had some small beads and pins made up of copper. Now the way these beads were arrived, or the way the archaeologists claim that these beads were arrived, is rather simple. As we have seen that lead was used in the prehistoric time or in the Stone Ages for glazing, or provide a glaze to the potteries. And now when you heat this pottery for making it strong, or when you do the processing of this these pots in a kiln, it means that you are raising its temperature. And it was observed that when you raise this glazed pottery, that is lead glazed pottery, over a definite temperature, the glaze started to form globules, and it was very luxurious and it appeared like silver. And this is nothing but the lead that formed the glazing of the pottery. So what you have is, you have coated the pottery, or you have made it luxurious by applying some material that you didn't know of. And when you put that into kiln and you wanted to make the overall pottery strong, and when you raise the temperature above certain limit, you saw that the glazing, it formed certain globules, and this was nothing but lead. And this is where people started to form, or they started to manufacture, or if you could say that, lead beads. Now immediately after this era, even though this era they did not extract any lead, it was just an accidental discovery of lead beads. We have to move around 3000 years to know, to understand or to see something that is exclusively made up of lead, a utensil or an article that is exclusively made up of lead. And we have a proof that can be found in Egypt, wherein we have a statue that is made up of lead, and it is dated back to 3000 BC. Now what this means is that now people have gained a certain amount of knowledge on extracting lead, or how to separate the mineral aspect, or to separate the element aspect or the metal aspect from its mineral. So earlier it was just glazing application, and during this glazing or during the process of arriving at a good pottery, people discovered or accidentally discovered the ways to make lead beads. But in period of 3000 years, there was it is claimed that by the archaeologists, depending on such statues or such articles that are purely made up of lead, that there has been a sufficient development in the extractive approach or extractive technique for lead. Now, even though so far there has not been any particularly useful application for lead, if you come back to the period of Romans or the Roman era or the kingdom of Rome, then you could see that, or the empire of Rome rather, you could see that the lead found an extensive usage in this period. So people started using lead for their water pipes, their aqueducts, linings, and all those things. People started using lead. And this was a clear indication that the extractive approach for lead has improved and expanded and developed so much that the Romans, the civilization at that time, saw lead to be a fit material to make pipes and handle waters in their huge city. Now, the name plumbum comes from, it's a Latin word, it comes from Rome. Now, the name or the reason we have this name is because the meaning of this name is liquid silver. So this name did not exclusively mean lead, or this was not exclusively meant for, or it was claimed or it was designated for lead. The way people arrived at this name was they were more interested in silver, and one of the ways they thought or they extracted silver was through ores of lead. By appropriate techniques, they arrived at or they extracted silvers from the ores of lead. And when they arrived at, or when they extracted the silver from lead ores, whatever slag they saw, this slag they referred to that slag as liquid silver. And this liquid silver, being the ore, that the ore was a lead based one, and lead was a predominant non-ferrous metal in that ore, even though it was used for extracting copper in the ancient times, even though, or by the Romans particularly. But given that this ore, which they actually used for extracting silver, but this ore was particularly lead ore, the slag that was formed out of it, or the byproduct that was formed out of it, or that they categorized as liquid silver when they extracted the actual solid silver for their purposes, this they referred to as the slag which was rich in lead, they referred to that as liquid silver. And when you translate that liquid silver into Latin, it was referred to as the plumbum, and that is the etymology or the name, how we get the name, how plumbum got its name, or the lead got its name. Now, if you are wondering from where does the name plumbing comes from, given that this liquid silver, that is the plumbum, was used in pipes and construction of other apparatus that dealt with water supply, since this plumbum was used in all those places or in all those applications where the modern day plumbing is involved, people who worked on lead, they were referred to as plumbers. So that is where you get your name, plumbers. So plumbers and plumbum are quite related. It is not that from plumbers we get the name plumbum, but plumbum is the lead, and the lead was used in plumbing applications. And since people worked on lead when they were working on this water supply and all those things that are related to modern day plumbing, they were referred to as plumbers. In addition to that, even in today's time, we refer to pencil or the tip of the pencil as lead. This is because in the during this period, in order to have a setup like pencil, they used lead, and that is the reason why even today we refer to the tip of the pencil as lead. Or if you have some sort of a modern or an upgraded version of a pencil wherein you have a separate tip or a separate lid. So that is where the name comes from. In the Rome or in the ancient times, the lid was used as a pencil with an additional contraption, and that is the reason, or that is where we get the modern day usage of the word lid. So this is a brief historical perspective of lead particularly. So now for our understanding, let us look into the different alloys of lead, and to begin with, what we have, or before looking into the different lead and its alloy, let us begin by considering the characteristic properties of lead and its alloy that influence the metallographic approach. So our primary focus is on understanding the metallographic technique, or understanding what unique metallographic technique is needed for lead and its alloy. To understand that, let us consider the properties that influence these metallographic techniques. So one of the property is the low hardness. Lead and its alloys, they have characteristically a very low hardness. The reason the low hardness plays a vital role in your metallographic technique is because whenever you use a technique that you normally use for other materials, for the low hardness materials like lead and its alloy, what is possible is that you distort the existing microstructure. So when you have a definite microstructure in any other material that is relatively hard to lead, when you compare it to lead, then you can use definite mechanical polishing, or you can use a conventional mechanical polishing that will not distort its microstructure. However, when you adopt the same approach to the lead and its alloys, given that it's a material that is characteristically it is not that hard, or it is characteristically soft, then when you adapt the same approach that you adapt for any other material that is relatively hard, then that might distort your microstructure. The other problem, or other way, or another effect that this low hardness would impose on your metallographic technique is that it might create a pseudo structure. So in addition to distorting your original microstructure, it might also create a pseudo structures, meaning supposing the load that you are imposing, or the mechanical condition that you are imposing during the polishing is quite high, then you might deform your sample, and while analyzing it, you might assume that to be something that is implicitly formed during, or that is the implicit property of the material. So such pseudo structures might develop when you adapt a conventional technique or conventional metallographic technique, when special care is not given for the soft lead and its alloy. Now, in addition to this formation of pseudo structure, the abrasive material that we use in polishing might also contaminate the surface of your material by getting embedded onto them. So in these three ways, that is by distorting your microstructure, or by developing some sort of a pseudo microstructure that was not originally present, or by contaminating the surface of your material by embedding or by the abrasive particles that you use for polishing that might get embedded and contaminate your surface. And these three are ultimately caused because of the low hardness or the softness of the lead and its alloys. So special care must be taken when you want to polish, or when you handle the lead and its alloy for metallographic studies. So this is one of the characteristic features that we want to when you want to hold to us when you are working on lead and its alloy, particularly when you want to study metallographically the lead and its alloy. The other property that we need to keep in mind while working on lead is its highly corrosive in nature. So when you relate it to some other non-ferrous materials, it is corrosive in nature, and this plays a critical role when you want to etch the alloys of lead or pure lead, because you have to be very much careful in which etchant you are using and how long you are using. Now any longer duration might, even though you have used correct amount of etchant or correct proportion of etchant, longer exposure might totally destroy the surface of the material. So you have to be very careful about it, and also depending on the alloying elements that you have to be very specific about which etchants are using. So given that the properties of the material plays a significant role in the metallographic techniques that you choose, or both polishing and etchants that you choose, we need to understand what are the different alloys that are available, that are associated with lead, what are its components and how their properties vary. So in order to understand let us begin by considering the rather predominant alloys of lead. So to begin with, as we have seen in other non-ferrous metals, the first alloy usually is its purest form, and even in this case the lead in its purest form is the first form of the alloy. So this alloy is characterized, or this is often referred to as the corrosive lead, because like I said, or like we have seen in the previous slide, the one of the characterizing feature of lead is that it is corrosive in nature, and that is the reason why, since this is pure lead, it is referred to as the corrosive lead. Now the degree of purity, or the amount of the criteria to call a particular lead into or refer to that as a pure lead is that it should have at least 99.9% of lead. The amount of impurities or the alloying elements, when it is less than 0.01%, then we can call that particular material as lead or pure lead or corrosive lead. Now one of the reasons why people want to manufacture or produce such 99.9% pure lead is because it is used in the manufacture of other lead compounds. For instance, it is used in the manufacture of lead oxides, and if there are other lead compounds that you want and you want it in its purest form, then you need to have a pure raw material, and that pure raw material is this corrosive lead or the pure lead. So this is the reason why we would like to manufacture even though it's corrosive in nature, we would like to manufacture this pure lead, that it helps in, or it serves as a raw material or precursor for development of other lead alloys. Now for etching this pure lead, which comprises of 99.9% lead, it sounds like an ad, but yeah, that's how it is being characterized. So when you have a material that is so pure, the way or the etchants that are involved are acetic acid and hydrogen peroxide. So there is a specific combination of it. So these combination of chemicals, they act as the etchant for pure lead. Now microstructure is rather typical. When you have a polycrystalline pure lead, it means that all you could see is just grain boundaries and grains. So there is nothing new or characteristic of the microstructure associated with pure lead. Now the other alloy that is commonly used, or that when you see an application of lead alloys, the predominantly used one is the combination of lead and calcium, and this is characterized by the maximum of 0.15% calcium. Now by adding calcium, the properties that are enhanced is the mechanical properties. So this is relatively superior. It is not superior to all the other non-ferrous material, it is relatively superior to all the other lead alloys. So by adding mechanical, or by adding certain amount of, or very small amount of calcium, what we are essentially doing is we are essentially increasing the mechanical property of lead. So this is one of the alloys that are predominantly used in lead applications. Now the region or the place where it is used is the lead acid batteries. So it is claimed that 75% of lead usage nowadays is on lead acid batteries, and this alloy, this combination of lead and calcium, it is used to form grades of lead, and that is immersed into the sulfuric acid, and ultimately which helps in producing the electricity. So this is where the maximum application of lead is focused, and given that this is a lead calcium alloy, so this is the predominant alloy that is used with base material lead. So to reiterate, the application of lead in today's life or today's world is lead acid batteries, and this lead acid batteries comprise of, or this is made up of an alloy that comprises of lead and calcium, and that is the reason why we consider the alloy of lead and calcium as a predominant alloy. Now the etchants that are required to make the features of the lead calcium alloys visible to us are acetic acid and hydrogen peroxide. This is similar to that of the pure lead, because whatever amount of calcium we are adding, it is very close to that of the pure lead, and that is the reason why, since the chemical properties does not change much with this amount of calcium, the only property that changes is the mechanical property, we use similar etchants. Now when you want to see the characteristic microstructure of lead calcium alloy, it looks something like this. With the decrease in temperature, the solubility of calcium significantly decreases in lead, and at eutectic point you have the formation of this specific rods, and these rods are formed within the grains, and these are therefore referred to as the intergranular rods. So the predominant alloy of lead, which is the lead calcium alloy, would have a microstructure like this, and this is being characterized, or this is being made visible by the combination of acetic acid and hydrogen peroxide. The other alloy that is relatively used in today's world is the combination of lead and copper. Of course, this does not mean that there is only copper present in it. There are other alloys that are added to enhance the solubility of copper and also the property of copper, but when compared to other alloys, the copper or the weight percentage of copper is quite large, and therefore compared to other alloying elements, rather the weight percentage of copper is quite large in this particular alloy, and therefore it is referred to as the lead copper alloy. The property that it is enhanced by addition of this copper is the high temperature stability and also the fatigue properties. So what essentially we have achieved by help of this by adding copper and few traces of other alloying elements is we have increased the high temperature strength of the alloy and also the fatigue properties. Now these are used in structural applications, and particularly given that we have increased the strength of the material and now also the mechanical or fatigue properties, rather this alloy or this combination of alloy was used in at least in large quantity in structural application, and now the amount of its use in structural application has significantly reduced. One interesting factor that fact that I found while preparing for this lecture was this combination of lead or this lead copper alloy was used in the construction of World Trade Center. As you can see, particularly it was used in the lining of water supply that supplied water to the whole of the World Trade Center. It is important to remember that while this article was written, World Trade Center was still with us, and it was before 9/11. So this is one of the prime examples of the usage of this lead copper alloy, and this we were able to achieve by increasing the mechanical properties, particularly the high temperature strength and the fatigue properties. Now the microstructure nowadays in the present condition that we are in, this combination of lead and copper has significantly reduced, particularly when you consider the structural application, it has been significantly reduced. However, when you want to consider when you have such an alloy and you want to etch it, the combination of etchants that are required is acetic acid and the nitric acid, and as you can see, this will also have a certain eutectic point, the combination of lead and copper, and you will have some separate a lead rich region and the copper rich region, and this can be made visible by the combination of acetic and nitric acid. So along with lead calcium, we now have seen a combination of lead copper alloys. Now the third alloy that is predominant in the lead family is the lead tin alloy. Now the solubility of tin is quite high in the lead, or rather the range of lead tin alloy is quite huge. As you can see here, we have this combination of non-ferrous material ranging from 5 to 70%. Of course, when you exceed 70%, it will no longer be lead alloy, it will rather be referred to as the tin alloy. But when you consider from an application point of view or from the usage point of view, this lead alloy or the range of tin that is added to this lead alloy is quite expansive, and it ranges from 5 to 70%. Now what addition of lead does is it increases the tensile and shear strength of your alloy, and in addition to increasing the mechanical properties, because each of the materials that each of the alloying elements, predominant alloying elements we have seen, they have added some amount of mechanical or enhanced some amount of mechanical properties to the pure lead, and the similar behavior or similar trend is also observed with the addition of tin. However, one critical aspect or one critical achievement or that is established by the inclusion of tin is the reduction in the melting point or the melting temperature of the alloy. thereby it is being used and enabling us to use that in the applications like solders. So now whenever you talk about a solder or a lead based solder, it is nothing but the combination of lead and tin. And this again, I don't know if you already know it, but the reason why we have this combination is because in addition to its melting point or this change in the melting point, it also offers a good tensile and shear strength. Now when you want to understand the microstructure, or when you want to study its microstructure, that the HN that you would use, or you would it is advised to use, is the combination of acetic and the nitric acid. And when you use this combination of HN, you will be able to see a microstructure which is of this form, wherein you could see a lead rich region and also a tin rich region. The tin rich region has hedged much, and therefore it appears in a darker manner, while the tin rich region appears in a brighter form, and that is the reason why you could then distinguish the tin rich and the lead rich region. Now in addition to this different lead alloys, there is another lead alloy that is important to us, that is the combination of lead and antimony. So the fraction, or the way we would characterize this particular alloy is, you can see here, there is a definite proportion of antimony that needs to be present in the lead in order to be referred to as the lead antimony alloy. Now the change in the properties that is established by the addition of antimony is the corrosion resistant, which was a problem in case of lead, is now being enhanced with the addition of antimony, and also the conductivity of the material is being sustained. And given that the conductivity is sustained and the corrosion resistance has been increased, this particular alloy is used in the manufacture of cables and also in pipes. So cables meaning the cables that carry current or heat. So when you talk about any cable that is made up of lead, generally it comprises of a quantifiable amount of antimony in it. Now when you have such an alloy with the combination of lead and antimony, the etchants that you would need to use is the citric acid and ammonium molybdate. So this is the combination of etchants that you need to use in order to ensure that there is sufficient amount of contrast in the structures, or in the microstructures, or in the phases that constitute the microstructures. Now a typical example or a typical microstructure of a lead antimony alloy would look something like this. Now in this microstructure, as you can see, in the intergranular region or in the grain boundaries, you have a specific amount or a specific phase present, or a specific or a characteristic region, or this grain boundary region is sufficiently different from the actual grains, and there is a specific it is comprised of a specific phase that differentiates it from the actual grain, and this is nothing but or the phase that or the way we could characterize the phase that are present in the grain boundaries is nothing but the antimony rich phase. So the solubility of antimony in lead is sufficiently decreases with decrease in temperature, and they get occupied in the grain boundaries, and in the grain boundaries they form antimony rich phases, and sufficiently or based on this accumulation of antimony in the grain boundary, the properties of the material would change, and this has enhanced its usage, or this is the reason why its usage is being extended to the cables and pipe. And since they are since the alloying element that we had is largely confined to the grain boundaries, the conductivity is not much disturbed, and thereby enabling us to use that material wherein the conductivity is necessary. So these are the prominent alloys in the lead family, and we have seen that for each of these alloys the etchants that we use vary, and each of these alloys have the characteristic microstructures. So based on this, by relating any microstructure that you see for lead, ultimately you would be able to understand which alloying element could be the major alloying element in this particular lead alloy that I am seeing. So as you can see, there were different alloying elements wherein the precipitate that were formed were confined to the grains. That was an example for the lead calcium. We saw that when you consider lead calcium, we had a precipitate forming, eutectic precipitate, and that was within that occupied a position within the grain, and it was in the form of rod. So if you could see, if you see a microstructure something similar to that, then you could assume that the calcium is one of the major alloying elements, and of course it has its own etchant. And later we saw that in case of tin we had rich region and lead rich region and tin rich region, and the contrast was significantly different, and they appear to have their own positions or their own grains, and that is one of the characteristic microstructure related to lead alloys. And here what we have seen is when you have antimony, the antimony occupies the intergranular region or the grain boundaries, and their properties are correspondingly changed. So within the lead alloys, when you see that there is a precipitate that is forming along the grain boundaries, then you could very well make an educated guess that it could be the major alloying element could be antimony. So with this alloying elements and with this discussion on the alloying elements, their etchants and also their characteristic microstructure, I would like to wind this lecture up. So let us see ourselves in the next lecture wherein we will be talking about another non-ferrous alloys. Thank you.